Dark Shadows, number 81, BTR 10966, air 101766, take one.
My name is Victoria Winters. For 18 years, most of this great house has been closed off. 18 years, during which the servant staff has consisted of only one man. A man whose continued devotion to the Collins family has been the driving force of a narrow, lonely life.
Black coffee, please. Hello, Devlin.
What do you want?
Figured I'd have my coffee with you.
I don't remember inviting you to sit down.
Figured we ought to talk, you and me.
The last time we talked, you and me, you put your big paws around my throat.
Shouldn't have done that, Devlin. I'm sorry.
Well, don't bother apologizing. Just find another table. Another table, Matthew, or the counter. Anywhere but here.
You're a rich man, Devlin.
What do you want, a handout?
I don't need money. Miss Stoddard takes care of me. Got my job and I got my house. I'll have them both for the rest of my life.
Good for you.
But you have money, Devlin. All you'll ever need. Why do you have to have Collinwood, too?
You really want me to answer that question?
Yeah. I heard you want to own Collingwood. Devlin, Stoddard will never sell Collingwood. Don't you know that?
Matthew, let me give you a little free business advice. There's nothing in this world that's not for sale. Not at the proper time or for the proper price.
Not Collingwood. Never.
Never is a long, long time. Susie.
Why do you want it? Because of Bill Malloy?
That's one of the reasons, yes.
Do you still think he was murdered?
Yes.
I said Malloy's death was an accident. Why can't that be the end of it?
Because I don't agree with the coroner.
But it's the law, Devlin. Now it should be over. Malloy was a good man. He should be more decent, not with more threats and more violence.
You talking to me about threats and violence?
I said I was sorry for what I did.
Fine. Then when I'm through with Collinwood, I'll apologize. Oh, thank you, Susan.
Not smart like you, Devlin. But I know you can't go on the way you are without somebody getting hurt.
Well, it's not going to be me. Not this time. But you needn't worry, Matthew. What happened to Mrs. Johnson won't happen to you.
What do you mean?
Mrs. Johnson, Bill Malloy's housekeeper. When Bill was killed, she lost her job. But whatever happens to Collinwood, you never have to worry. I'll even get you a housekeeper so you won't have to work so hard.
The place will burn down before you'll live in it.
It'll make a lovely blaze, won't it? By the way, Matthew, I heard a rumor around town that Mrs. Stoddard was thinking of hiring a housekeeper. Is that true?
I've got nothing to talk to you about, Devlin.
Well, I didn't really believe it anyway. Mrs. Stoddard would never let another stranger come up and live in that house.
You really think you know her, don't you? Well, she called Miss Johnson up today. That's how much you know her.
Oh?
Miss Johnson's coming up to Collinwood for an interview.
Today?
Yeah, and she may end up living there. Mr. Malloy's housekeeper. Not you, Devlin. Never you.
Hello, Mrs. Johnson. This is Burke Devlin. Yes. Yes, I heard all about it. Why didn't you call me and tell me? Mrs. Johnson, I don't care what you thought. I want you to keep me informed on this. All right. But be sure you contact me as soon as the interview's over. Let me know how it went.
Matthew, I'd much prefer you to avoid seeing Devlin. I think it would be better for all of us.
Miss Stoddard, he was there. I just sat and talked to him. There wasn't any trouble.
Are you sure?
I promised you off the last time, didn't I? And I don't break my word to you.
Oh, I'm sorry, Matthew. It's just that, well, you know I consider you part of the family, and I don't want any of us to provoke unnecessary violence.
What if Devlin starts it?
We'll take care of that problem if and when it happens.
Yes, ma'am. I better get started on the hedges.
Matthew, I want you to know one thing. I intend to do everything possible to keep Devlin from hurting any of us. I want life at Collingwood to go on as if he doesn't exist. There'll be no changes.
What about Miss Johnson?
Well, I haven't made a decision on that as yet. But if I do engage her, life will be much easier.
I know it's none of my business, ma'am, but are you sure you want another stranger in the house?
I'm not sure, but she does need a job.
She's got family, a daughter. She could live with her, couldn't she?
Do you object to my having someone here to help me?
We've managed all these years.
And we've both grown older. Why don't we leave it this way, Matthew? We'll see what happens. And if I do engage her, which I may, it will be because I think it's best.
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, come in, Mrs. Johnson. Thank you. It's been a long time.
Yes, it has.
Strange how the years go by, and it takes a tragedy to bring people together.
Yes, ma'am.
Bill, Mr. Malloy spoke of you so often, and you and I have had so many telephone conversations that it doesn't seem as though I hadn't seen you for all these years.
I have felt extremely close to this family for a long, long time.
Shall we go into the drawing room?
Thank you. Oh, what a lovely room.
Well, you've never been here before, have you?
Well, Mr. Malloy talked about this room a lot, but of course he was never much good at describing things like furniture.
No. Boats were more in his line. I'm sure I don't have to tell you what a loss his death has been.
Are you getting someone to replace him at the cannery?
Well, eventually, I suppose, but I wasn't thinking of the cannery. I was thinking of the tragedy of losing a dear and close friend. You were very fond of him, too, weren't you?
Yes, ma'am.
Won't you sit down?
Thank you.
Mrs. Johnson, as you may know, I haven't had any permanent help here other than Matthew Morgan.
Yes.
For a good many years.
I know.
And there was a time, of course, when the house was full of servants.
Yes, I know Mr. Malloy often spoke of those times. I know even on the night that he died. I'm sorry. I just can't realize that he's gone.
We must accept these things, Mrs. Johnson.
He was a good person. He needn't have died.
We can't always control accidents.
You do think it was an accident?
Don't you?
Well, I think it could have been prevented. I'm sorry. I came here to speak about a position, not to talk about Mr. Malloy.
Well, they are connected, I suppose. Mr. Malloy always spoke so highly of you that when I began considering engaging a housekeeper for Collinwood, you were the first person who came to my mind.
Oh, I appreciate that, Mrs. Stoddard.
What I want is someone to do the cooking and help with the general house cleaning. Oh, not all of Collinwood, you understand. Most of it's closed off.
Yes, I know.
This would be an important step for me, Mrs. Johnson, bringing someone into the house. And it's a decision neither one of us should consider lightly.
Well, I know that Mr. Malloy would be delighted if I were working here.
There are 4 people besides myself living in this house. And there are many pressures here, many tensions.
If you're referring to Burke Devlin, well, I'm well aware of his attitude.
How well do you know him?
Oh, well, scarcely at all. And that's just the way I'd like to keep it.
I'll be perfectly frank with you, Mrs. Johnson. We live our own lives here. What we say and what we do and how we live is our concern and our concern alone.
Well, I'll be equally frank with you, Mrs. Stoddard, if I may. I'm not a gossip, and I respect other people's privacy. I hope they respect mine. And in the almost 20 years I worked for Mr. Malloy, I never repeated a word I heard in his home.
Oh, I'd like to show you the rest of the house.
Thank you.
We'll go upstairs first. Well, that's about it, Mrs. Johnson. Have you any questions?
No, none at the moment.
Was the salary I suggested satisfactory?
Oh, it's more than fair, Mrs. Stoddard.
And when could you start?
Any time. I could start today if you wish.
Well, yes, Matthew?
I was wondering if you wanted me for anything.
Not just now. You know Mrs. Johnson?
Yes?
Hello, Matthew.
I understand you may be coming to work up here.
Well, I think that's up to Mrs. Stoddard.
Well, actually, Mrs. Johnson, I'd like to think about it a bit more.
Yes, ma'am.
Matthew, would you take Mrs. Johnson back into town?
Yes, ma'am.
I'll call you when I make my decision.
Mrs. Stoddard, I love this house, and I would enjoy working here. I want you to know that.
Well, that's a good beginning, and thank you very much for coming.
Well, I hope to come back to stay. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
I really should have had lunch before I went up to Collinwood, but I was much too excited for that.
Are you sure you want to go to work up there?
Oh, of course I do. Are you having lunch, too?
No, but I didn't finish what I was saying.
Oh, I've heard all the stories of the legends and the ghosts, and it still hasn't made me change my mind.
They're there, Miss Johnson. The ghosts. It's not just talk.
You don't seem very anxious for me to work at Collinwood. Why is that?
You've been working for so long. Your daughter can take care of you now. Well, why'd you want to take another job?
I see no reason to give you explanations.
They're my family up on the hill, Miss Johnson. Just same as if I was born to them. I don't want nothing to hurt them, or nobody.
Well, why tell me that?
I just want you to know how I feel, that's all.
Well, maybe I should tell you how I feel then. It's true, I could go live with my daughter, but I'd be nothing. I'd be a shadow in someone else's house. Now, I can't live that way. You understand that, don't you?
I suppose.
But that's not really what's worrying you. What's worrying you is if I went to work at Collinwood, would I be loyal to the family or not? That's it, isn't it?
Here.
Well, that needn't bother you, because I was tremendously fond of Mr. Malloy. More fond than you'll ever know. And his first loyalty was to Mrs. Stoddard and the people up at Collinwood, wasn't it?
I don't want to talk about him.
But I do, because I want to behave exactly as he would want me to. So if I went to work up there, I would become part of them. I'd live with them, work with them, certainly never do any harm to them. I want you to be assured of that.
Just so you know how I feel.
You know, Matthew, Mrs. Stoddard is very fortunate having someone as loyal as you to care for her.
Not only her, Miss Johnson. Everybody in that family. All of them.
Oh, thank you. I'll order later, please. Mr. Devlin's room, please. Mr. Devlin, this is Sarah Johnson. I've just been up to Collinwood, and I want to come up to see you, please.
Come in, Mrs. Johnson. Well, what about the job? When do you start?
Well, I'm not sure if I even will start or not.
Didn't she offer you a job?
She said she'd let me know.
What went wrong?
Well, nothing went wrong. She's just hesitant about taking someone else in the house. I can't force her to hire me.
Everything was set up. I got Carolyn to ask her mother to hire you for the job. I even made Carolyn think it was her own idea. Everything was settled. Mrs. Stoddard swallowed the bait. She called you up there to hire you for the job, and you've loused it up.
I went up to Collinwood on an interview, and I didn't louse it up, as you so crudely put it. I don't like your tone, Mr. Devlin. I don't much like you. Good day.
I want to know what happened. Does Mrs. Stoddard suspect any connection between you and me?
She suspected nothing. She was much too busy being the grande dame for that, and explaining to me how special her family was, and showing me around the ancestral palace, and that was all. Look, Mr. Devlin, I'm not a fool, and I don't like being talked to as if I were.
I know. I'm sorry. But this is important to me.
Well, it's important to me, too. I'm just as anxious as you are to uncover Mr. Malloy's murderer.
When did Mrs. Stoddard say she would call?
She didn't say.
Then it might be today.
Possibly.
Well, don't you think you should go home and wait for the call?
All right. Now, you want me to call you as soon as she phones?
I won't be here for a while. I'm going out to Lookout Point. That's right, Lookout Point, where Bill Malloy was murdered.
What do you expect to find there?
The same thing we expect to find up at Collinwood. Some kind of small clue, some evidence, some proof that Bill Malloy was murdered.
Stoddard?
Oh, yes, Matthew. Did you get Mrs. Johnson home all right?
I left her at the restaurant.
Matthew, what am I going to do about Mrs. Johnson?
Ma'am,
Oh, we could use more help here. Heaven knows you do more than enough work.
I haven't complained.
I know you haven't, but she seems like an efficient, well-balanced sort of person. And Mr. Malloy was very fond of her.
I'm sure whatever you decide, Miss Stoddard, it'll be for the best.
Hello, Mrs. Johnson. This is Elizabeth Stoddard. Mrs. Johnson, I've been thinking the whole matter over, and I've made a decision. I'd like you to start working for us as soon as it's convenient for you. I'm pleased, too. I'm sure it will be the best thing for all of us. Fine. Just call when you're ready, and I'll have Matthew come and pick up your luggage. Goodbye. Well, that's done. I hope I haven't made a mistake.
Repercussions continue to be felt in Peyton Place as testimony continues in Lee Weber's homicide hearing. Tonight at 9:30, 8:30 Central Time on ABC.